Here we go. Hello. Hey, how's it going? My name is Felipe. I'm here with Ryan Scello. He's an underwriter for FTF. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Any day where I get to hang out and talk some real estate with my good friend Felipe is a good time for me.
Oh man, I'm so happy you're here.
Of course.
That's awesome.
Anytime.
Well, let's get started then. Please tell me a little bit, what do you do for a living?
Yes, so my name's Ryan. I am now an underwriting team lead for a real estate hard money lender in Cleveland. I worked my way kind of through a position called real estate analyst, worked in another position called collateral analyst, and now I'm leading a team of a couple analysts myself, focusing on the North and South Carolina territory.
Absolutely, that's amazing. You work for a great company as well, FTF, Fund That Flip. They're great. Everyone that I've met there, including you, is a fantastic person, so I have nothing but good things to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, so please tell me a little bit more. What do you do at FTF? What's your day look like when you start working? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so I've been at the company a little over 2.5 years now, and it's been quite a journey as a startup company. I've worn a lot of hats. I've done a lot of different tasks with a lot of different departments. Worked my way up. Started as an entry-level real estate analyst. I had a couple experiences with internships in real estate, where I was more on the asset management side, a little bit more of a commercial side with a different internship, but came in relatively new to residential real estate. I guess for some context, I was a finance major at John Carroll, so always a numbers guy, always fascinated with investing pretty much my entire life, but started the job essentially with having no real estate background whatsoever. I've never taken a real estate class in my life, but some of my experience and passion for it really kind of helped me get into the role. So kind of starting off right off the bat, just learning what the role was. So it's essentially the real estate analyst position is you value properties that our borrowers want to get a loan on. You lend off the loan to value or the loan to cost, which is essentially we look at the asset, we run comparables, and we essentially find out what is the property worth now and what is the property going to be worth after you put in X amount of dollars into rehabbing it. It could also stretch as far as new construction.
Mm-hmm.
We're now doing things like condo conversions in Boston, subdivisions, townhome developments. So we've kind of branched out really far from where we started. But that's essentially the gist of the real estate analyst position. We value the property and then we structure the loans based off of our valuation. So we're looking at things like profit. We're looking at the scope of work and the budget, which is very important. We're looking at the amount of money the borrower needs to bring to close, how much equity they have in the deal, how much stake in the game that they have is very important as a lender. Simply because we want to be a lender where we feel like a partner to the borrower as opposed to a financial institution where we're only here for interest payments. We want to be there to ensure success of the project, and that is our number one goal, is to be a partner as opposed to some kind of black and white bank vibe that is kind of where the industry has always been. So
absolutely,
I feel we're pushing the industry forward and trying to be more of a partner as opposed to a money, just strictly about money.
Absolutely, I love that, and I feel that's one of your guys' biggest differentiations. Is what you bring to the table. You guys have your own team of people who underwrite the deals, right? Mm-hmm. That's what it's called,
yep.
Underwriting the deals.
Yep.
And how do you feel these appraisers then impact your job in the real estate industry, and how does that set you apart from the other lenders that are just there for the interest?
Yeah, so our CEO, he kind of founded the company. He was new to the Boston area, and he was trying to find money. And he's everyone funds this money based off of private relationships, private money relationships where you find the rich guy in town and he will fund your deals.
Yeah.
And him being new to the area, he found it very difficult to find money. from these rich people because he didn't have like the connections and he was like right out of college, didn't have like great credit, great liquidity, but he was still trying to get into real estate.
Yeah.
So he essentially founded the lender, found some people that could start funding the deals that he saw, started working with other people. But when it comes to underwriting, our company's philosophy that makes us like very unique in the area, in my opinion, is we want to be a risk mitigator that is based off of the internal analysis of the deal and not solely rely upon an appraiser, a third party valuation of the property, because that is a part of like the real estate industry that is incredibly unregulated and it's very subjective. So we have a team of analysts. Like essentially, my role is an in-house appraiser for the lender, and we have a high amount of confidence on our internal valuation. We do a lot of work like challenging appraisals and giving data points to the appraisals to make sure that like that value comes in as accurately as possible. So yeah, that's like kind of the gist of why that role exists.
That's important. Yeah. Awesome. I love that. And every house that I've talked with you, you've been right on the money. So I can testify for Ryan. He's really good at what he does.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So, well, we just talked a little bit then about the role that appraising is playing for your company. But for someone who's not in a company, someone who's starting out and he might be looking to buy a property and see if it's a good fit, if it's a good investment on their money, I think that what you do is very important, right? You're looking at that property and you're evaluating it. Well, then I would like to know then, for someone who hasn't done this before, what are some key factors that they should be looking out that would really move the needle of where that property is going to stand to be a good or a bad buy?
Yeah, so essentially what we do is borrowers come to us and they're like, hey, I have a deal. Hey, I want as much money that you guys can offer to this deal as possible. So what we do is essentially we analyze the deal and we're like, is this a good deal? Is the borrower buying the property right? Is he putting enough money into it to get the after repair value out of it? So profitability is very, very important. And I also do a lot of work with looking at the budget, making sure the costs make sense on the scope, making sure we compare like the photos on the appraisal of the property to like the scope. So it's essentially like, oh my gosh, like you look at a property that is completely destroyed and needs pretty much every single thing, and you look at his budget and you're like, oh my gosh, like he doesn't even have drywall on here. So you ask about it, you're like, hey man, like are you taking drywall out of pocket? Like why is this not on the scope? And I think it really all boils down to like our department is essentially backing the borrower as a partner and being like, hey, we love your deal. We really, really want to fund it, but we're going to poke holes in anything that could go wrong or anything that doesn't make sense. So it's ultimately like, to me, like if I was a borrower, I would come to fund that flip and get my deal underwritten, and they would essentially say like, okay, like if Fund That Flip is a fan of the deal, then like I have a little bit of extra confidence that it's a very, very good deal. So we try to like be behind the borrower and be in their corner and like ask the questions that like they might have like maybe missed in the process or things like that. So we do it a lot for the borrower's benefit, but also like our own like internal risk strategy as well.
Absolutely. That's really cool that, you guys partner up with someone. Now, in case someone is like just watching this and they want to like, they have this house that, it seems that is good, but they're not quite sure. What are some of the things that they can look at that they can be like, okay, this is a good purchase.
Oh, for sure.
This makes it a bad purchase. Like, what are the key features in a home?
Yeah, so when essentially looking at a property and looking to see if the deal you're looking at is a good deal, the two things I would look at from a comparable standpoint, whether that be trying to find out what you should pay for it on the front end or trying to figure out what you will get out of it once the rehab is done, the two things I would focus on is number one, given the way interest has been rising and kind of like the shifts in the market, there's a lot of like unpredictability right now. the number one thing, like when we're underwriting deals currently, that has actually changed since I started, is our most important thing is find comparables that have sold recently. So the
Mm-hmm.
number one thing is like we try to look at properties that have sold within the past 6 months. But it's also very intertwined with kind of the number two point when underwriting a deal is find comparables that are as apples to apples as your property as possible. So we dig into things like adjusting for like beds, baths, square footage, neighborhood, location. We even go into things like school zones, crime rates, market appreciation, like days on market, things like that. But also like getting condition right and like knowing a lot about scopes of work where it's like, oh yeah, this guy's putting in like whatever cheap quartz countertop as opposed to this other guy that's putting in things that are more valuable, maybe like a marble countertop, and like how that will affect the after repair value and how the market demand for the quality of finish matters. Because like you think about a luxury mansion in Florida is going to be asking, like you put it on the market, people are going to be demanding top of market
Right.
finishes, custom finishes, so like a very high scope of work. Where in places like Cleveland, say it's like a duplex rental property, you'd see things more like butcher block countertop, quartz, and like just more average finishes. So another big part of like the profitability conversation is it's like we don't want people overbuilding for the market they're in, but we also don't want people underbuilding for the market that they're in.
Okay, can you dive a little bit more about that? Why do you want to overbuild or not?
Yeah, so obviously when you're looking at comparables, it's very location based. So say you're building a $500,000 new construction home, but you're building it in a neighborhood that might not be the most
Right.
desirable location based on the neighbors, the neighborhood, the amenities. It could be anything. It could be crime rate. Maybe it's like a more like industrial kind of area. So you don't want to see a guy developing in an area and like overbuilding for what that location and that neighborhood would demand essentially on the
Understood.
market.
Understood. Then how do you then assess the risks on your loan? Like,
Yeah, I think it all comes down to like what is the data showing us? Like what kind of comparables have sold in this market? That's why my position becomes very, very difficult because I'm making decisions on what they could sell the property for, potentially based on data points that aren't very good.
mm-hmm.
So things like how rural markets are, like how custom the asset is, like we see things from like, oh yeah, we have 4 single family homes on one lot and we're gonna rehab all of them. And then like I get that on my plate and I'm like, how in the world do I find a comparable for this asset type? You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's where things get very, very difficult. And that's when structuring the loan, you're able to dial back some of the levers on how risky the project may be. So like say the asset risk is a little too high, I'm going to like price up a couple of interest points, or I'm going to lever down on like things like loan to cost, loan to value, things like that. Um, but then you get into the whole other conversation of pulling the levers of the loan structure based on the borrower. So say we have a guy that might be light on liquidity, light on experience, might have like a couple things in the background that could be a little bit hairy, credit. So we're able to just pull those levers and work within like the matrix of our underwriting guidelines to essentially present to the borrower and be like, this is what we feel confident in based on our risk analysis of both the asset and the borrower.
Understood. So just as deep of an analysis that you make on the property itself, you make on the borrower and their strategy to
Mm-hmm.
deploy that cash and to make a return.
Yep.
So you're not just a lender, you overseeing the whole process
Yeah.
until the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it kind of speaks to the reason we care so much about both is we're an asset-backed lender, so we take a first position lien on the asset as opposed to like say the property goes sideways. We're an asset-based lender, so we would take back the property, but we wouldn't go after the borrower's other assets. We wouldn't go after the borrower's money. We're lending on the asset essentially, which is very good. And the other part of it too is the one thing from a borrower perspective that I think what our underwriting department, it kind of sets us apart from the industry is we care so much about experience. So we want to see guys that have done 10 flips before, and they're going to get the best leverage and the best rate and the most attractive loan structure. So we want to see, like, if a guy's trying to build a $600,000 home, we want to see that he's built whatever 5 plus $600,000 homes, and that makes us very, very comfortable on the borrower's execution ability of the project.
Absolutely, because what you really want is their success, not just to keep the asset or to keep the interest. Awesome. Man, we covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
A lot of my questions you answered in that. Is there anything that you feel like misunderstood about your company, or that
In the role.
in the
Things
role
like
that
that.
you like to talk about?
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of gap that our company and our department is like trying to get over the hurdle of on a daily basis more has to do with the borrowers. I'm sorry.
The
there's
door
a knock
just.
at the door.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I completely lost my train of thought. The gap. What was I going to say? The gap between
Something very smart.
I'm trying to
The
think.
gap between.
The gap between so the borrowers we work with, they're hammer and nail kind of guys. They're kind of dudes that they've been in construction. They've been like renovating houses, but they're not exactly used to a financial institution overseeing their project. Because I guess our biggest competitor, like I said, is like the private money guys. So you think in markets like the Carolinas, like where it could be like relatively rural, like outside of whatever, 45 minutes outside of Charlotte, we'll say, we're competing with guys that will go down the street to the most rich person in town, and they'll go to them and be like, hey, I have this like really cool project, like would you mind funding it? And it's more of like a handshake deal as opposed to our process where you're signing 100 pages of loan docs to get the same kind of money and the same kind of relationship. So I think where I come from is like, I like kind of was in a financial background, grew up, like essentially started my career as a real estate lender. What I strive for every single day is to see the perspective of the people that we are lending on, because for the most part, we come from very, very different worlds.
Yeah.
And I think like connecting that and like growing a relationship between the underwriting department, the sales team, and just having empathy for people that may not understand the process or may not be trusting of the process is where kind of like that relationship bakes into it. And in my opinion, you become a better underwriter the better you're able to see the perspective of the people and the clients that we're working with. So it's very like perspective based and bridging the gap between the financial institution and the guy who's building homes every single day and has never worked with a lender before.
That's really cool that you bring up the empathy you need to have, especially in a world where all that matters is numbers and results. So
yeah,
it's really good to see companies that are there working with people to achieve goals that are mutually beneficial. So that's really nice. I love your guys' company, by the way. I don't know if you guys could tell. Awesome. So can you guide me a little more then on the systems you have in place? Maybe as a company as a whole, and also on the side of underwriting. You look at a property, where do you start? Where do you end?
Yeah, so I could take you kind of through like what our pipeline of originating a loan begins with, just based on like the origination team and the process team is kind of what I'm the most used to. And I guess for like more context, other teams would include like, we have a tech team, we have people building our platform all around the country, all around the world. We have people in Brazil and like Honduras and like all these like amazing tech people that are building the platform that we use every single day. So pretty much everything we use from like a tooling standpoint is self-created from scratch. We're a fintech company. But from an origination standpoint, it starts with a borrower. Well, it could be any kind of thing. It could be a sales development rep saying like, hey, we got a call, we have a deal. He brings it up to the account executive and they'll be like, okay, like this deal makes sense. This is a borrower that I think we can lend to. They submit the deal to underwriting, and underwriting values the property, looks at the structure, and does everything based off of assumption first,
Hmm.
which is very difficult because say you're trying to figure out, oh, what is this property worth today without looking at any pictures of it.
Right.
So you're assuming the condition, you're assuming like you have no idea what the borrower's experience is outside of the verbal that the borrower has told you. So you underwrite the deal based on assumptions, and then I'll give it back to my sales guy and I'll be like, hey, this is what I'm confident in, assuming everything you told me checks out based on the documentation. And then sales takes the loan terms and negotiates with the borrower if needed. Borrower signs off on the loan, and then you get into the process of the closer takes over and starts requesting documents from the borrower. Then the closing specialist gets all the documents, puts it back in the real estate analyst's name. I go back to the deal, and then I confirm all of the assumptions that were made on the front end and make sure everything checks out. And a lot of the times it's not perfect, but that's kind of where our flexibility as a lender comes in, where say we were expecting 8 fix and flips and we were only able to tie back 4, you can maybe pull some levers on the loan structure if needed, or you can kind of go the compensating factor route, which I think is like very unique to FTF. Say a guy's experience comes in light, but his liquidity comes in high. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy has $1 million and we were only expecting 500K. I can use that to compensate for experience and write essentially a narrative around how I got comfortable with that compensating factor. But you could do the same thing with credit. Say a guy's credit came in low, but his experience came in high. I will feel essentially from a high level risk perspective, relatively the same, because I care more about experience than credit. And maybe the credit came in low due to reasons that don't even matter to us. Maybe he missed a couple student loan payments, or maybe his utilization is high, which are things to me are not red flags for risk. So we can move forward from like a compensating factor basis, which I don't know, it provides us a lot of flexibility and being able to like work with borrowers and provide them what they want based on a very holistic view of risk, essentially.
Absolutely. That's a pretty good overlook on how you guys work. I appreciate that. So you've been working with very different markets, right? You mentioned North Carolina. You definitely have underwritten for Cleveland. You have underwritten for tiny homes, for multifamilies, for single families, all kinds of real estate related. Well, everything's real estate related, but all kinds of homes. And I'm just wondering, have you observed any trends, any repeating things that are going on across the markets, across the cities, across the...
Yeah, I think the basis of this question is really kind of dives into the world of where we get our funding from, because we have capital markets partners that we sell our loans to that have their own demands, have their own underwriting guidelines, and they are kind of the people that set the risk trends. The biggest example, I think, is like since interest rates have risen, they believe that the asset types that are in rural markets are a lot more risky now, because when housing depreciates, the rural markets are the first to essentially go down in sales price. And the other part is like the luxury homes. So you think like top of market townhomes, you think top of market beachfront mansions, whether that be like Carolina Beach, Florida, things like that. So I think the two biggest trends are we're seeing a lot of like hitting the brakes on rural markets and the luxury markets for sure.
That's very interesting. Very opposing two sides of two extremes, right? The most luxurious and the less fun, huh? So you staying away from these markets because they're the first ones to get hit in case of a market plummeting.
Yep. And I think the reason why kind of dives into a lot of what happens in the role as a real estate analyst is like, you think about rural properties, it's a lot harder to be confident on the comparables because there's less comparables, they're further away, the asset types are different, land value changes assets in rural environments very easily. Because you have a guy with like a 1 acre lot, and then you have a house 4 miles away on an 84 acre lot, and you're like, how much does the land really play into the value of this asset?
Right.
And then in the luxury market, it's the same way. Like you have people with custom mansion homes and just custom finishes, and maybe one's waterfront, and it's very rare that a
Yeah.
waterfront property comes to market. So me being in the role I am, I want to be able to find I want to find a home that has the same waterfront view or has
Yeah.
access to the beach, and it becomes very, very different in those luxury high-end markets to find comparables that I'm confident in, because it's very hard to adjust for things like, does this property have a dock? Like, does it have
Right.
access to the beach? What is the value add of having a pool versus not having a pool? Things like that. So it becomes very, very difficult with like the more custom and like luxury homes as well.
Absolutely. I imagine, especially if you have something very custom like a basketball court, right? Not everyone's out there playing basketball or tennis inside of your home. So like, how do you account for that? And that's my question. How do you account for that? And do you have like a set price that you believe those things add to the property, or is all like percentage based? Like, how do you assess those very custom factors?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually think our philosophy within like the custom factor conversation is very different than the approach appraisers take. For example, like we'll just use a pool as like probably the most basic custom example. An appraiser will put an adjustment for the pool. Like say you have a bunch of comparables that don't have a pool, ours has a pool, and appraisal will put like plus 75K value add for the pool. And in my opinion, I would be more of the opinion of like, hey, let's not do an adjustment for the pool. Let's only find comps with pools, as opposed to finding asset types that are a little bit different and placing a subjective value on how much you think the pool costs. That's why, in my opinion, like the subjectivity and the lack of regulation in the appraisal industry is the reason I think positions like mine will become a lot more common, because you could have a phenomenal deal with a great borrower, and you can get an appraiser that subjectively could make adjustments that don't make sense. Because like I've looked at appraisals where I have the same comps as an appraiser. I'm at 300K, the appraiser's at 250, and it's all based on the adjustments that they make to the property that are essentially 100% subjective. Where I try to take it more of like a data approach, and I'll provide comps with a pool. I'll provide comps that have the same waterfront access or beachfront access or properties with a dock, because those data points essentially mean more to me, to the value of the asset, because it's more apples to apples.
Understood. Well, still on the appraisal side, and I then would love to jump in and talk a little more about how your company gets funding. But for what you see so far, let's say we're here in the Cleveland market, everyone's buying a house, renovating it. Where do you see the amenities or the things that we do that add more bangs for the bucks? Is that like renovating a bathroom or kitchen? Hit me up. Is that doing something like that? Is that placing and changing appliances? Is that having a new garage? What do you see being the most common value adds that someone can do to their rental that they're purchasing and will bring the most for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to start with saying the biggest value driver of any property, any deal, any project is location. 100%. And like speaking in Cleveland in general, there's like markets and neighborhoods popping up where like the delta in rent between some of like the neighborhoods in the good part, and then you cross one street and the delta in rent could be wildly different. So getting that right and getting the location right based on the comparable set you use is probably the number one thing. But when it comes to like actual renovations, like in the Cleveland market, I don't really think it's any different than anywhere else in the real estate industry, to be completely honest. I mean, things like central air is the number one, and I kind of learned my lesson with that in like my own personal real estate investment, with like what rent is driven by, and things like, I mean, Cleveland number one would be driveway and garages are big ones. However, in my opinion, a garage adds a lot of value, but to me, the cost of building a garage from essentially from ground up is not worth the return that you might get on it.
Yeah.
So say you spend 20 grand on a garage and it's only adding 15 to 20 grand to the property. That's not essentially, that might not be the greatest investment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really the same here as anywhere else. Like countertops, bathrooms, flooring, like those are all like very, very strong value drivers. So I don't know. I don't think Cleveland's like any different from most markets around the country.
Yeah, it's pretty much, you see this repeating everywhere.
Yep.
Cool. Well, then I'd love to talk about how your company does get their money, and then we can dive a little more on your personal real estate investment, who I was very, very happy, very happy to be part of, and to help you and facilitate all that.
Yeah, for sure. So what makes Fund That Flip very unique is because we have two pools of buyers for our loans. So we have our capital markets partners that are essentially spread throughout the country, and they have very, very specific buy boxes where they require things like an appraisal. They require pulling credit from multiple different bureaus. So in my opinion, they take a lot of like, it's more of like a bank atmosphere when working with our capital partners. They request certain things. They ask a lot of questions, and their due diligence is very, very strong, which essentially makes the underwriting department perform to a standard that we want to impress them. We want them to buy the most of our loans because, say we book a deal at an 11% rate, we can sell it to a capital partner for maybe 8.5, and we make that spread on the interest rate. However, their standards for the loans that they buy is very, very high. So we need to do a very, very good job on the organization of the files, the quality of the comparables, the quality of the narrative. So after I'm done underwriting every single deal, I have to write a narrative on the decisions I made, maybe some of the exceptions I made, outline what the project is, why we feel comfortable at this loan to cost or at this loan to value or at this rate, and then write maybe some of the compensating factors that would have been put into the decision. And that is sent to the capital partner as a way of essentially selling them on the deal and try to instill in them the confidence that we have on the asset, the project, and the borrower as we do as a company. And then the other unique way of funding is we have essentially a crowdfunding platform. So internally on Fund That Flip site, if you qualify as an accredited investor, you can invest in like whole note deals and also funds that we've created. So maybe there's a deal with a really, really good borrower, and a capital partner might be like, oh, like his credit is a little bit low, and we'll be like, well, his credit's low because of a reason that doesn't actually impact the risk, and a capital partner may not buy it. We'll take it to our crowdfunding platform and be like, hey guys, like we have a great deal here that we really, really believe in, and that's like how we fund the other half of our deals. So the flexibility that the crowdfunding platform provides is we can do a lot of, call it like weird deals, and bring it to the crowdfunding site and tell a story and be like, hey, this is why we're doing a multi-condo conversion in Boston, or this is why we might have been advanced a little bit more money on the land than we normally would. And it gives us the flexibility to do one, really, really creative projects with creative loan structuring, and essentially gives us a second avenue to stand out in the market and provide more value to our customers that have more unique projects that a bank might not want to fund because it's unconventional or it's a little weird, or maybe there's like some kind of zoning concerns. But our analysis and like our deep dive into deals like that make us feel comfortable, and I think our investors on both sides have really appreciated the quality that we bring them.
Awesome. Hello, Salami. That's awesome. That's really good to hear. Well, then I'd love to then talk about your experience with real estate. Just to clarify here, I met Ryan at a FTF convention, and as we talked, I realized that he just purchased a home exactly right next to the one I just finished renovating, so that was very serendipitous,
Mhm.
and we became friends, and here we are now making a
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. So I guess the experience I had with getting into real estate investing firsthand was a long one, and it took a lot of time. But as I like started in this role with this company, I realized that I'm working with a lot of people that have their own investment properties. I mean, we have multiple real estate investors throughout the company that have like proven the amount of success, and I've learned so much from after underwriting deals and seeing like all of these clients and borrowers of ours like succeed and do these crazy projects and make incredible profitability on some of these deals. I just like gained the confidence in my ability to find a good deal, one, on the market for myself, um, and two, just like kind of have the attitude of like, hey, I have all of this knowledge that I've gained, and I have a lot of resources within my company to make me confident on being able to do this. So essentially was motivated to bet on myself and kind of try to get into it. But it took a couple of years of preparation to like set money aside, get like the money part of it right, and then once that was all set, you got to start essentially day one, start looking for a deal.
Yeah.
And I'm like very blessed in my position to where I essentially get paid to identify if a deal is good or not.
Right.
So that part of it is, for a lot of investors, the hardest part is finding a good deal, and that was like part of it that I learned through my company and like came very naturally to me. It was everything else I needed to figure out when it came to like walking properties, finding a good realtor that knows real estate investing. Shout out to Maya,
Yeah.
a previous guest on the podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a long process. I mean, I started looking for a property 6 months before I closed on the one that I closed on. So I probably walked like 14, 15 properties over that month span. I put offers in on 3. I was under contract on 2 before closing on the one that I closed on. And I actually came into a very weird scenario where I was doing it with like FHA financing, and I came across a property that penciled really, really well in the cash flow model that I had. But FHA refused to finance it because it was within falling distance of a cell tower.
Wow.
Which was, the FHA guidelines are hundreds of pages long, and that had to have come from page 942.
Right.
So every lender, every real estate professional and investor I had ever talked to has never heard of that problem coming up. And I got to learn from essentially a 1 in a million chance of something like that happening. And
so unexpected.
So unexpected. No one had ever heard of it. There's like my lender, or the person I was working with at the lending company, was like, I've been in lending for 30 years with single family real estate, multifamily real estate. I've never heard of this before. But I fought so hard to get that property. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to close on this. I sent a surveyor out there from the cell phone company. I sat on hold for 1 to 2 hours with the cell phone company being like, I'm closing in a week. Like, I need someone to come out here and like help me prove to FHA that the cell phone tower has no risk of falling on the home. But based on all of the effort I went through, like FHA still refused to finance it, and I had to fall out of contract on what I would call like my dream investment home.
Which it turned out to be a good thing.
The moral of the story is it is still on the market. So I closed on my house in February, and I was under contract on this house, I think in November, December of 2022. Yeah, 2022. And it appraised pretty well. I was under contract, everything was good, but I found out that nobody in the industry is going to fund this deal, so it would have to be bought cash. So the property is currently sitting on the market for $215K. I was under contract at $255, and I am grateful every single day. It's like there's a reason why I didn't close on that house, and it would have ended up being a very, very bad investment. I didn't even know it at the time, but essentially the reason it's still on the market and no one's bought it is because the buyer for it would only be able to purchase it cash. because apparently there's no lenders in the market that would fund a property that is next to a cell phone tower. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
So, and then
that's crazy.
The property I ended up closing on popped up a week or two after I fell out of contract, and I was still on the market, being super aggressive, walking a lot of properties. And I actually found my property on like the side of Zillow where it's like posted a day ago. And I was looking at multifamily, like 2 to 4 unit investments, and the property I ended up finding and closing on, whoever listed it, it was for sale by owner. And I ended up finding out that the owner of the property was a doctor in California that had never stepped foot on the property. And when he listed it, he spelled multifamily wrong. There was like a typo in the multifamily tag. So when you would look at like multifamily real estate on the Zillow filter, it wouldn't pop up. So I got on the phone line, I'm like, hey, like, could I walk this property? And I'm like, yo, I want to get this one. I think it's a good price. And then the more I went through the process, like putting in an offer and stuff, I'm like, why is there like no competition? Like, it was like almost off-putting as to why I wasn't like competing with anybody. And it was because the listing was not visible to people looking for it. So I actually got incredibly lucky, to be completely frank, after getting completely unlucky with the other one. I put in an offer, and Maya helped me draft up an offer where I was able to get $5,000 seller credits back at closing. So instead of coming to the closing table with 10 grand, I came with 5. And that was able to fund my eventual rehabilitation of the property with Felipe.
Very nice.
So, yeah. And then, I was able to close, and that closing went really, really well. Had to work with the tenant, and she was like month to month. She decided to move out, and I met Felipe, I think maybe within the week of closing at a Fund That Flip real estate event.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we were just like getting to know each other, whatever. I'm like, oh, what are you working on? And you're like, oh, I'm working on a house like in Tremont, whatever. And you're like, what street? I'm like, West 11th.
Right.
And I'm like, no way. I'm like, just closed on a house on West 11th. Like, we pulled up the Google map, like literally within 5 minutes of talking to each other. And I found out that
each other.
and I found out that he was literally rehabbing the house directly next to mine. I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
And he was like finishing up that job, and I'm like, hey, like, I have an opening. Like, I would love for you to like rehabilitate the property. And we figured out a scope of work, but I saw Felipe's like profile, his previous work that he's done for other borrowers, other investors in the market, and I was like super impressed. And I'm like, this dude has a great eye for. He puts like a creative touch on a lot of his work, and like I think his like passion for like what he does really, really stood out with like other contractors I had been in contact with.
Thank you.
So we ended up getting a scope of work together, and I've learned so much from kind of that entire process. But
Yeah.
I can keep going through the story.
No,
but
please
do you have
do.
any comments up until this point? Any questions?
I mean, that was just a blast. It was like instant, and we're just connected and working on everything. I was wrapping up the house right next to yours, and then we got started on that. I'm actually really glad that you saw that creative side, and you actually allowed me to put my opinions and my touch into what then was the renovation of everything, which was really, really cool to do. I think everything came out pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to point it out here, what unexpected things, right? Like the first one being the cell phone tower.
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thought that a cell phone tower would be such a giant liability to Salami wants to play be such a giant liability to landing, who would have thought? And the second thing is the devil's in the details, right? And just like spelling multifamily wrong. It sounds like something, any of us could do, but that had such a giant impact on, your SEO with Zillow.
Mm-hmm.
So just paying attention to the details in real estate, it's very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the hard part too, that there's a lot, right? A house, it's a lot inside the house. It's a lot for getting your money right to buy the home, and all these aspects you have to be very thorough and make sure you have your everything down to in the point of your all your numbers correct, and spreadsheets are your friend. Okay, and you're really good with spreadsheets, which that's a point that I really appreciated working with you, is that we work together on the scope of work spreadsheet and all of that, which is something I don't usually do with my clients. I just make the scope and send it out to them and they can review, but that was really nice. Are there any other unexpected that you found during work that you were like, wow, I just never would have thought of that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like I said, I don't come from a background of, like, I don't have any family in real estate. This is like all very, very new to me. And like, yes, I work for a lender and I'm looking at deals all day, but doing it as like your own personal project and personal investment, like this is a whole new world for me.
Right.
So my whole thing with essentially doing a BRRRR strategy is, number one thing I had to get right is buying the property for at or less than what it was worth. And I was able to do that. But the second part of it was more of just like, hey, maybe if some things, essentially, you're paying a tuition cost to learn. And on the first one, my goal was like, hopefully it won't like destroy me, but it's like, even if some things go wrong and like there's things that like aren't accounted for, I'm like paying to learn. I'm like paying the price of like, okay, like these are the things that might have gone wrong on the first one. Like I'm going to learn my lesson and do it better on the second one. So I think there's like three things that in the process of buying the house, rehabbing the house, figuring out like what to list it for and that whole process, three biggest things I learned. Number one was essentially the scope. I've never created a scope of work before, and I had, outside of for Fun That Flip, looking at scopes of work all day, I hadn't really had a super personal and good idea of like what things should cost and things like that, and like the difference between the labor cost and the material cost. So a big part of my learning experience was going through places like Amazon, Home Depot, and just comparing products and comparing the value add of maybe a higher quality product as opposed to a lower quality product, and where I wanted to go, maybe a little bit more luxury custom route, or where I could go more a little bit like basic and things like that. So figuring that out was a huge learning curve to me, but I think it like really boils down to, I had no idea how much needed to be done to the house until I met Felipe. So like I got an inspection and like the inspector's like, okay, like this is what you got to do, but Felipe's like, no, like if you want this to be like the highest of quality, like you should do, for example, like the outlets, new GFCI, like that stuff that like hadn't even really crossed my mind as something that would be very important. So I think the first thing was, we went a little bit over on the scope, but I personally believe that was just like from my lack of not estimating how much needed to be done and how much should be done for the quality of the asset that I wanted to put my name on, and the kind of tenants and the kind of rent that I wanted to get afforded a higher quality that I wasn't really expecting when I first made the scope. And Felipe helped me and was like super, super patient with the process of like me trying to figure it out. And like, okay, like we could like, it was like a never ending, like, oh, Felipe, can we do this? Like, oh, Felipe, can we do this? And like, we ended up going way higher on the scope than I thought. But to me, it's like, it's a long-term investment of, I can like, I don't know, I have a great sense of like quality, and like, I really, really love how it turned out. So that's something that will essentially be worth the investment someday. So number one, scope cost, big learning curve there.
And just a comment on that, like that's like such a giant, everybody that I've ever worked with or that I've ever seen do a home, no one ever was like on budget. No one is on budget. You always are like, okay, what if now that I'm doing all of this, what if I do that too? What if we do that? And you open Pinterest and all these ideas pop up. But I think that, the essentials you definitely got to cover. If your outlets are outdated, definitely update your outlets, change your GFCIs. Don't cut corners, make sure things are pretty, for your tenants to be living there, right? Like you're creating space. You're not just making money, right? You're like creating space to people to live in,
And that they
that's
want to be proud of, and that they like want to like live in and
exactly.
be passionate about. For
They're
sure.
gonna call their moms and be like, "I found a
Yeah,
new spot,"
yeah.
and you want it to be a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's definitely these things, and you can definitely save you money by maybe you paint your cabinets, maybe you just put butcher blocks, and that's what we ended up doing, and still got a great look, but you still have it updated and for affordable pricing, right? But that's the number one thing I see. People, everyone goes above the budget, and
Yeah.
that's something to be accounted for too. Like, you have a budget, make sure that you have a little bit of cushion if you go above it, because that's the number one thing I see. Now, what's your second and third?
Yeah, so 2 and 3. I mean, number 2 is like a really quick one I could just touch on. Is the one thing I didn't foresee based on the rent I thought I could list it for was the biggest thing I left out of the scope was not having or not inputting central air.
Yeah.
And that is something like by the end of the scope, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is a huge expense that I like don't think I'm gonna be able to fit into the project. And what I originally listed the property for rent for, everyone that was doing the showings, like really the only feedback was like, this is a beautiful unit, but like you're a little bit out of market on rent price because you don't have central air. And like I'm doing all these showings in the middle of the summer. So that was like a really big like
everyone's sweating.
Yeah, so I'm like big eye-opening experience is like I need to figure out the cooling of the unit, because I bought the house, I created the scope like essentially in like the winter and spring months where it wasn't very hot, so it was just something that kind of slipped my mind essentially. So what I ended up doing is I bought a couple like portable AC units, like not the window ones, like very high quality where you could like move them to different rooms, drop the rent about $200 to kind of be a little bit more in market without that.
More competitive.
Yeah,
right?
Without that essentially request of the people that you can't list at top of market because of this one thing that I kind of did not realize.
Yeah. And your third one?
Yeah, and the third one is one mistake that I will never make again is listing photos matter a lot more than I thought. So I'm like, God, yeah. I don't really have a photography or like art background, to be completely honest, but I'm like, I could
clearly.
So I'm like, I could totally take these listing photos on my own, post them, like no worries in the world. Didn't think anything of it, but the lack of interest in the beginning, on top of the HVAC thing, was I the big thing in like this whole learning experience as well is like I wanted to collaborate with people that knew the industry. So Felipe, and then like my realtor, and then like all my coworkers that had between 5 and 10, 15 units. I'm like, hey, what am I missing here?
Yeah.
And like what's like creative like criticism and feedback that could help me rent this for like market price, and like what is wrong with the listing and things. And I sent the listing to a bunch of people, and they're like, the number one thing is like, dude, like for the rent price you're getting, the photos are not high enough quality, and it doesn't show off like the craftsmanship and the quality of work that the unit actually has. So it was like kind of an eye-opening experience to me, where it's like, man, like before listing it, I really should have invested in like professional photos to show off the beautiful work that Felipe and we worked on.
It's very worth it.
Yeah,
hire a real estate photographer.
100%. Hire a real estate photographer. It makes a complete 180 difference. So those were like kind of my 3 biggest learning experiences from my first essentially burr project.
I love that. I love that. These are really good learnings too, I feel like we can carry those on for the next ones too.
Oh, for sure.
And what does real estate mean to you, Ryan?
Oh my gosh, that's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, but I would love to, because you're the kind of guy that I personally know you, and you value freedom a lot.
Oh my gosh.
I think that's a recurring theme for people who are investing in real estate. Like you are investing for your freedom, right?
Yeah.
So what does real estate mean to you? What do you plan on once you have accomplished more of your goals?
For sure. Yeah. So I mean, I could probably start that conversation with, I am looking at real estate 9 to 6 p.m. every single day and have been for 2.5 years. So I've seen probably thousands, maybe even in the tens of thousands of properties in the past couple of years.
Wow.
So if I'm not passionate about it, what am I even doing?
Exactly.
So I think it like really stems from me growing into my role with Fund That Flip and them entrusting me in like my knowledge and confidence and letting me essentially have my opinion and create my own underwriting strategy and like having the trust in in my quality of work and the standard that they hold. So it means a lot to me from a career side of I want to provide the best experience for our clients while also making sure that every single loan that I put my name on is something that is a good idea for the company and a deal that we want to partner with. But I think it all kind of stems from like, oh my gosh, like this is really cool because I'm looking at finished projects all day long. So I get to see like, oh my gosh, like these countertops are sick. Or I'm like, yo, like you get to look at like the craziest like waterfront Airbnb rooftop pool and like it changes your worldview completely because now I walk down the street and all I'm doing is looking at houses because I'm like now a real estate nerd as opposed to people that aren't in the industry and like you're just walking not even paying attention to like the world around you. So it's completely changed the way I look at the world. And I think like kind of getting into like where I'm like personally passionate about it is when it comes to investing, I've always thought that like having something tangible is very, very important. And the one thing that makes me believe that real estate's kind of my number one kind of investing strategy is everyone's always going to need housing.
Yeah.
It's one thing that's like, it's never going to go out of style. People are never going to not need places to live. So I think like just boiling it down to that simple fact is what kind of clicks in my mind of it being a good investment. And then neighborhoods appreciate and you can get into like the nitty gritty of like neighborhoods appreciation. And I think it kind of stems from like the freedom part of it as well, where I'm the kind of person that is very geographically inclined. Like I was a young kid and like I was able to name every single country in Africa. And I was like fascinated with like the world and like kind of how people live and other cultures. And I mean, whole nother podcast, but like I studied in London and traveled to 14 plus countries in Europe.
We gotta do it.
Yeah, and like I was able to like I'm almost addicted to seeing the perspective of how other people live all around the world and how it can compare to how I live now. And I think real estate is one of the things that brings that to light the most because you look at whatever, a house in Italy on like a vineyard and you're like, yo, I wonder what that would be worth. You know what I mean? It's like everything's like, yo, like you get like super creative with it. You see like a house with a big lot and like people are thinking like, oh, like what would that sell for? But I'm thinking like, yo, you could split this lot into 6 different lots, get the zoning code changed, and then build 6 single family homes there and make 6 times what the house would be worth. So
you'd be a developer.
Yeah, it brings out like the creative energy for sure, and like getting into the freedom part of things. And another reason why I connected with Felipe so well is like I feel like we're both very, very passionate about like travel and like seeing other cultures, and we're both super interested in like the national park trips, the hiking and things like that. So my real estate journey is like mostly fueled by my essentially passion for like adventure and seeing other people's perspectives, storytelling. And I don't know, I like always thought about like the stories my grandma would tell about like living in her old house like when she was a kid and living with 10 people in one unit in like downtown Buffalo. And just like how much real estate plays a part in everybody's life essentially. It's like it's a huge formative thing that makes you who you are. Everybody has a story, and I feel like real estate is really ingrained in a lot of people's story based on the location of where they live, how they were brought up, like kind of what class you were, even like the rich versus like the poor, things like that. So I just think real estate is intertwined with society to a point that just like absolutely fascinates me and always has.
Cool. That was my favorite answer to that question. I love that. Awesome. Ryan, it's been a pleasure to have you over. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think the last thing is just do what you're passionate about, and data matters, but at the end of the day, make sure you're always doing a good thing. Relationships matter. That's like probably my last piece of advice is relationships come first. Felipe actually said it right before the podcast.
Exactly.
It's not all about money. It's about relationships.
Yeah.
And catering towards and helping your community and improving the people's lives around you. That should be the first thing when talking about real estate or investing in general.
Absolutely. Lovely. Thank you so much for coming over. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, man. All right. If you like this video, feel free to smash that like button, subscribe for more content, and I appreciate you spending your time with me. Thank you. Until the next one.